Yeah, just after 5, the BBC called it. There's going to be a Labour government.
Yeah, and actually, Rishi, by the way, this sofa is almost too comfortable.
It is,
there is a danger of falling asleep.
Please don't.
Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, at least for the next few hours, was the first to call it publicly, actually, in his victory speech in Richmond and Northallerton in North Yorkshire.
Victory as in him being re-elected as an MP.
Indeed. He said that he had spoken to Sir Keir Starmer, that Labour would form the next government and that the Conservatives had lost. And it was only a couple of minutes after that that the ticker of the counts of seats from Labour's perspective passed the winning line, and so that they had won the general election as opposed to it merely being a projection that they were highly likely to. And then we saw Keir Starmer, didn't we, at one of the Tates in London, I don't know which one it was.
Modern.
Oh, was it? Saying, well, allowing himself a smile. So I've been following Keir Starmer and indeed Rishi Sunak for the past 6 weeks. And Keir Starmer has never wanted to appear complacent. He had to strike quite a fine balance when I was asking him questions just the other day, actually, in Hucknall in Nottinghamshire, about the whole business of, how he might form a government and the whole business of government. Wanting to give off an impression that he had thought about being in government, without giving off too much of an impression that he thought it was guaranteed that he would be in government, because that's the kind of dilemma as far as complacency is concerned. He allowed himself a smile, didn't he, at Tate Modern, and I think when we see him later in Downing Street as Prime Minister, when he's been to see the King a little later this morning, there'll be a kind of tone of magnanimousness, if that's a word. Magnanimity. That's the one. And a kind of understated kind of tone. Why? Because A, it's his character. Why, secondly, because of the nature of the challenges that the UK faces. Why, thirdly, because, and I think this will become something of a discussion point in the coming hours, the share of the vote that Labour have managed, given the scale of their Commons victory, is actually nowhere near as spectacular as the number of seats.
So, Chris, help us understand the size of the Labour victory here and how big it is and how big it isn't. And I'll just give us some numbers. So as we're recording this episode of Newscast at 9 minutes to 6, Labour are currently on 385 seats, which is a 35% share of the vote overall. It is 188 seats up on where they were in 2019. And there's still 80 constituencies still to declare.
Yeah, I was getting laptop shame there, so I thought I should open mine and have a few pie charts in front of mine. I keep waving this toothbrush around like it's some sort of...
like
I don't know why. It's just,
toothpaste advert.
Yeah, I mean, politics, flipping heck. I mean, it's just incredible, isn't it? We're about to have our fourth Prime Minister in under 2 years. We've just had our second landslide general election in a row, but for a different party from last time and on an even greater scale in terms of seats.
What counts as a landslide, by the way?
Well, it's a good question, actually. I remember people calling Boris Johnson's landslide a landslide, and I found myself wondering, is it a landslide? Because I was measuring it in my head relative to the first 2 Labour landslides in 97 and 2001. Their victory in 2005, with around about 50 or 60 seat majority, was not described at the time as a landslide because relative to the previous 2, it had actually been quite a reverse for them. I think the 80 seats majority kind of was worthy of that label. I mean, not least because we had seen in 2010 and 2015 and 2017 very marginal victories. The Conservatives failing to get over the line on their own in 2010, them only just managing it in 2015, and then them failing to in 2017. So to win and win clearly, as Boris Johnson did, and win with a sizable majority, kind of, I think, deserves that label. And this result for Labour certainly does.
And I suppose, you can compare it to, Attlee or Blair, and you can look at the number of seats, or you can look at the share of the vote, or you can look at the size of the majority. I just think the best, probably most sensible way of looking at it is comparing to where Labour were in 2019 when Jeremy Corbyn was in charge. Exactly.
And they were on their uppers. They had a terrible, terrible result in 2019, their worst result in terms of seats since 1935. And what then happened was a shed load of folk within the Labour Party and beyond said that means that they're going to be out for another 10 years, etc., etc. I think the thing that I was attempting to get across when I had to sum this whole thing up when we got the exit poll 8 hours ago, is that the fluidity and volatility of the British electorate is greater now than it has ever been. And so whereas in the past, even going back to the late 90s and certainly going further back than that, a whopping victory for a party often meant, and the historical record bears this out, that they were highly likely to go on and win the next election too, even if by a smaller margin. I think it is much less easy to say that with confidence now. I mean, let's not get into speculating about the next general election. We haven't finished this one yet. But given that the Conservatives could win a landslide 80-seat majority in 2019 and find themselves in 2024 on the wrong end from their perspective of a colossal landslide in the other direction, albeit at what we now know to be the end of a very long stint in government. I think the last two elections rather emphasise the extent to which volatility is a baked-in reality now. And so Keir Starmer will be very conscious of that as he approaches governing.
How has he done this?
He has done this by a combination of a crushing Labour defeat, which forced the Labour Party to actually ask itself a really fundamental question, which is, what does it exist to do? Does it exist to aspire to govern, or does it exist to aspire to make a point, if you like?
And that's why he keeps saying, I've returned this party to the service of working people.
Yeah, so spectacular was their defeat last time that I think it forced that conversation upon them. And then alongside that, they were helped by two things. One was the longevity of the Conservatives' time in office. No party has ever won 5 general elections in a row. That's what Rishi Sunak would have had to do last night in order to win for the Conservatives. And then, as you may just have noticed, there's been a mild blast of turbulence within the Conservative Party in the last 4 or 5 years, with the rate of prime ministers they've got through, etc., which has probably helped Keir Starmer's cause and hastened the Conservative decline. So you throw both of those things into the pot, and I think that's where you get to with Keir Starmer. I was struck, though, by his defiance, Keir Starmer's defiance in his victory speech at the Tate Modern an hour or so ago, around about 5 o'clock in the morning, where he said words to the effect of, this wasn't predetermined. It wasn't a certainty that this was going to happen. I think that an acknowledgement that leader of the opposition is one of the toughest gigs in politics, not least because plenty never, ever make it to Downing Street. And here is this guy who came into Westminster in his 50s, half thought that he might become Attorney General in an Ed Miliband government in 2015, spent 9 years in opposition, and is now going to become one of our oldest Prime Ministers on assuming office. He is in his early 60s, when he becomes Prime Minister in a matter of a couple of hours' time.